everyone, welcome to another episode of Faces on the Front Line. I'm Britt Isenberg with the Gettysburg Foundation. I'm here with Chief of Interpretation for the National Park Service, Chris Gwinn. Chris, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Britt.
We're here to talk about another story on Little Round Top that maybe doesn't get the press sometimes it should garner, and maybe from a very common but uncommon American story. So I don't want to give too much away here, Chris. Would you tell us a little bit about our next character, Patrick O'Rourke, and how he fits into this story?
Yeah, thank you, Britt, and thank you again for having me on this series.
Yeah.
So we're up the summit of Little Round Top, standing next to the monument of the 140th New York Volunteer Infantry. And it's one of the most, I'll say, recognizable monuments on the summit, in part because we have the bronze bust of its Colonel Patrick O'Rourke, as you can see with the bright, shiny nose there, which maybe we'll hit on that at the end. Patrick O'Rourke is one of the Union officers that on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, would take the initiative to rush his command to the summit of the hill to repel a Confederate attack. And like many other Union officers that fight here, he'll be killed in the fighting. So he's one of those men in blue who sacrificed their lives defending Little Round Top that second day of the battle. What I think makes O'Rourke unique in this story is the fact that he is not a native citizen of the United States. He is an immigrant. So he's born in County Cavan. He comes to the United States when he's about 1 year old. So he probably didn't have any memories of his home in Ireland, but as far as mid-19th century American society is concerned, he is considered an Irishman, an Irish American. We often don't think about that, Britt, when we come to a place like Gettysburg, but the Army of the Potomac, the United States Army that fight here, roughly 30% of them are foreign born. They're either first generation Americans or they're recent immigrants to the United States. Michael Shara in his novel The Killer Angels has one of the, I think, the best lines of any Civil War historian describing this. He described the Army of the Potomac as a polyglot mass of vastly dissimilar men fighting for Union. And O'Rourke is one of those individuals. He's one of those individuals, and he's a fascinating human being that you don't usually hear a lot about, especially in comparison to Joshua Chamberlain or James Longstreet or some of the more famous individuals involved in the battle.
Yeah, it's interesting too because there are some very similar actions occurring nearly simultaneously on the hillside here. So let's just pivot slightly and let me ask you, what could it have been that might have compelled Patrick O'Rourke to offer his service to the country, and maybe a little bit about his backstory before we get here to Gettysburg?
Sure. So as I mentioned, he's an Irish immigrant, comes here at a very, very young age. He relocates to the Rochester, New York area, and he has something of a tragic early life. His father dies when O'Rourke is about 16. He had a scholarship to attend, I believe, the University of Rochester, which he's not able to do because he spends the latter half of his teenage years supporting his family. He will ultimately attend the United States Military Academy at West Point, where in 1861 he'll graduate first in his class, the same class that George Armstrong Custer will graduate last. So he is a professional soldier by trade. And it's always tough to go back a century and a half and try to dissect somebody's motivations, but you have to wonder if the fact that, having not been born in the United States, if there's a part of him that wants to protect and defend this adopted home, this new nation that he's now a part of. He will see active service in the first 2 years of the American Civil War. In September of 1862, he'll be made colonel of the 140th New York. So the 140th is one of those second-year regiments. They're recruited in the summer of 1862. So for these men, there's no misconception about what the war is going to be like. In the beginning of the war, when men rush off to enlist and they rush off to join, they're thinking it's going to be 90 days, it'll be bloodless, I'm going to go home a hero. By 1862, when the men of the 140th New York march off to war, they are not operating under that misconception. Everyone knows how bloody this is going to be. Everyone knows how brutal this is going to be. But still, they join to defend the Union. On the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, as Gouverneur Warren is rushing to try to find men to defend Little Round Top, one of his couriers, or perhaps Warren himself, actually intercepts O'Rourke. And O'Rourke has orders to go elsewhere. But at the behest of Warren, O'Rourke will lead his men up to the summit of the hill, and there's no time. There's no time to do anything. to correctly align in battle formation. They don't even have time to load their guns. When O'Rourke arrives on the summit with the 140th behind him, he can literally see climbing perhaps over the rocks and boulders around us men from Alabama and Texas, within a hair's breadth perhaps of taking the hill. And O'Rourke would lead a charge with his 140th New York down this rocky hillside, driving back the Confederate attack and securing this end of the battle line. It comes at an enormous cost, especially for O'Rourke personally, who will be shot in the neck and killed that day.
Yeah. Wow.
And a bit of tragic irony, he had been married for less than a year, and his widow, Clara, will end up spending the rest of her days actually in a convent. She joins the Catholic Church as a nun.
Yeah, so there's that famous phrase, right? History is written by the victors, and it's more like history is written by the people that live long enough to write it, I think, right? So let's delve into another topic that people can get very passionate about, I've found out here. What's with the nose and being so shiny? You want to explain this a little bit?
That's a great question. That's great, Britt. Thank you. When you look at the monument today, you'll notice the nose of O'Rourke is quite shiny, and that's because people rub it. Now, we encourage you not to do that because, as you can see, it does damage the metal, but the idea is that it's somehow lucky.
Okay.
Now,
but
why?
He was not a lucky Irishman.
He was
right?
not a lucky. He was not a lucky man on July 2nd. But so the legend goes that he left all of his luck behind for us today, and perhaps there's a larger point to that, in that O'Rourke did die here, and he gave his life for the country and the nation that we enjoy today. And through his sacrifice and that of many others on this hill and across the battlefield and across the battlefields of the American Civil War, these men helped put our nation on a trajectory very different from what it was on perhaps in 1859 or 1860 or 1861. So perhaps there's a little truth to that.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you. Well, folks, thank you for joining us for another episode of Faces on the Front Line. Chris, it's truly been an honor to spend some more time with you out here. Thanks so much. Let's do it again sometime.
Anytime.
All right. Take care. Stay tuned for the next episode of Faces on the Front Line.